Thomas Manning sat behind the wheel of his luxurious Rolls-Royce Cullinan, navigating the sunlit streets of Miami's Brickell neighborhood. The evening light bathed the towering skyscrapers and glimmering waterways in a golden hue. Beside him, his fiancée, Gabrielle Simmons, animatedly described her plans for their upcoming wedding, now just 6 weeks away. Yet Thomas barely registered her words, his thoughts preoccupied with his newest venture, Elite Encounters, an exclusive dating app for high-profile individuals. Despite the app's impending launch, doubts gnawed at him. No matter how much I tried to distill love into code, he mused, the intangible spark of connection, that synchronicity of souls amidst life's chaos, will always elude an algorithm. As they approached a trendy café, Maison Étoile, Gabrielle requested a coffee stop. Thomas, lost in thought about the app's match algorithm, barely heard her. It wasn't until she raised her voice, irritated, that he snapped back to reality. "Thomas, didn't you hear me? I said I want to stop for coffee." Her tone pulled him from his reverie, just in time to swerve and park abruptly in front of the café. Unbeknownst to him, his hasty maneuver forced a cyclist, a curvy, dark-skinned woman on a vintage bike, to brake sharply to avoid a collision. Startled, the woman regained her balance and shot him a sharp glare. Thomas raised a hand in apology, but Gabrielle seized the opportunity to vent her frustration. "This is all your fault," she snapped, her irritation compounded by the cyclist's reproachful expression. "You weren't even paying attention." The cyclist, now standing a few feet away, folded her arms and addressed Thomas directly. "You drive like you own the road," she remarked dryly, her voice laced with defiance. Gabrielle, already agitated, interjected. "And you ride that bike as if you're invisible," she retorted, her gaze dripping with condescension. "Though with your figure, invisible would be quite the miracle." The cyclist's expression didn't falter. "I thought he was the one driving, but clearly you're the one making excuses for him," she quipped. Typical. Thomas let out a small sigh. "Your reflexes on that bike are as sharp as your tongue," he remarked, attempting levity. "Impressive, really. I suppose it's hard to forgive even a slight slip-up when you're used to perfection from atop a bicycle." The cyclist's eyes narrowed. "My mother used to say, true worth isn't measured by wheels or wealth, but by the humility to see beyond arrogance." Without waiting for a response, she parked her bike by the café and walked inside. Gabrielle snickered under her breath. "She works here," she whispered to Thomas, her tone derisive. "So what?" Thomas replied coolly, unimpressed by Gabrielle's mockery. "Nothing," she said with a shrug, "just that the owner should be more selective about who represents their establishment." Thomas stopped in his tracks. "Don't even think about meddling with her job," he warned, his tone firm. Gabrielle waved him off. "Relax, darling. I wouldn't waste my energy on someone so insignificant." But Thomas knew better than to take her at her word. Later that week, Thomas sat in his sleek office on the 28th floor of the Manning Tower, engrossed in the final stages of preparation for the app launch. His workspace was a testament to minimalist luxury, marble surfaces, glass walls, and tasteful modern art. As he reached for a glass of water, his elbow accidentally knocked a glass sculpture off the edge of his desk. It shattered into countless pieces on the polished floor. Frustrated, Thomas called to maintenance. "Send someone up right away. There's broken glass in my office," he instructed curtly, before stepping out briefly to regain his composure. When he returned, he found a woman crouched on the floor, carefully collecting shards. Her robust frame and familiar skin tone jogged his memory. "Thank you for responding so quickly," he began, only for the woman to turn her head and meet his gaze. It was her, the cyclist. "You!" they both exclaimed simultaneously, surprise flickering across their faces. The woman smirked. "What a small world, or maybe you're just hard to avoid when you think you own it." Thomas crossed his arms, his expression shifting between curiosity and defensiveness. "I didn't realize you worked here." "Well, I didn't until I was fired from my last job, thanks to your charming fiancé," she replied. her voice even but tinged with bitterness. Thomas frowned. "Are you saying Gabrielle had something to do with it?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "What do you think? But hey, at least now I get to enjoy your sparkling personality while scrubbing floors." Thomas inhaled deeply, weighing her words. "I owe you an apology. And for what it's worth, you won't have to deal with Gabrielle's antics anymore. Consider yourself promoted, effective immediately." The woman blinked in astonishment. "Promoted? To what?" "To the IT department," Thomas replied smoothly. "Your wit deserves better company than a mop." She chuckled, though her surprise lingered. "Well, this is unexpected." The morning air inside the IT department buzzed with the hum of servers and the occasional tapping of keyboards. Abigail Moore, the newly minted tech analyst, stood at her new station, a sleek desk surrounded by monitors and gadgets. She scanned the system's back end with laser focus, her confidence building as she acclimated to the environment. Her supervisor, Clark Ashton, a man with salt and pepper hair and a stern demeanor, approached. He carried a thick folder of reports, his expression giving little away. "Abigail, we've got an issue with the matchmaking algorithm for elite encounters," he said, placing the folder on her desk. "It's producing erratic matches. I need you to figure it out, ASAP." Abigail nodded, opening the folder to find a detailed breakdown of the system's recent malfunctions. The complexity of the task excited her more than it intimidated her. "On it," she replied, with a determined smile. For hours Abigail dissected the code, analyzing lines and tracking errors with meticulous precision. She traced the issue to a series of overlooked parameters in the compatibility algorithm. With every adjustment she made, the system's responses grew more logical, its outputs smoother. By the end of the day, she had isolated the root cause, a conflict between user preferences and behavioral analysis models. "Gotcha," she murmured triumphantly. Clark returned just as she was running a final test. "Any progress?" "Not just progress," Abigail replied, beaming. "I've fixed it." Clark leaned over her shoulder to review her work, nodding in approval. "Impressive. Let's implement it." As she deployed the updated algorithm, Abigail couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Her unconventional journey, from cleaning floors to troubleshooting algorithms, felt like a quiet triumph. That evening, Thomas sat alone in his penthouse, nursing a glass of scotch while reviewing the day's performance reports from elite encounters. The system's newfound efficiency was undeniable, and he knew Abigail was the reason. Curiosity nudged him to open the platform and explore. Using an anonymous profile, he scrolled through potential matches, marveling at how smoothly the app now operated. Suddenly, one profile caught his attention. A big personality. Her bio was brief but witty. Greatness isn't just measured in inches or dollars. Sometimes it's about filling a room with laughter or taking up just a bit more space in the world. Thomas smiled despite himself, intrigued by the unapologetic humor. He hesitated for only a moment before swiping right. Moments later, a notification pinged. "It's a match." Meanwhile, across town, Abigail sat on her modest sofa, scrolling through elite encounters with curiosity. She hadn't logged in since creating her account on a whim during a late-night cleaning shift. When she saw the match notification, her eyebrows arched in surprise. "Well, well," she mused, tapping on the profile of her match. An imperfect gentleman. His bio was cryptic but oddly charming. Flawed, curious, and always learning, searching for someone who sees beauty in imperfection. Abigail couldn't resist typing a quick message. "So, what's the story behind your imperfections?" The response came almost instantly. "Let's just say I've made my share of mistakes, but I'm learning to own them." The exchange felt effortless, a playful back and forth that left Abigail smiling. Little did she know, her new match was closer than she realized. The next day? Gabrielle swept into Thomas's office with her usual air of authority, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. Her irritation simmered just beneath the surface. "Thomas, we need to talk about that woman. Abigail," she began, her tone clipped. Thomas didn't look up from his laptop. "What about her? Do you think it's appropriate to keep someone like her in this company? She doesn't fit," Gabrielle snapped, her frustration palpable. Thomas's eyes finally met hers, his gaze steely. "What exactly do you mean by someone like her?" "You know what I mean," she replied, exasperated. "She's not our type." He leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but firm. "Abigail is smart, capable, and exactly the kind of person this company needs. If you have a problem with her, it's your issue, not mine." Gabrielle's face reddened, but she bit back a retort, realizing she was losing this battle. She stormed out, leaving Thomas to his thoughts. Later that week, Abigail sat in the break room, enjoying a rare quiet moment with a cup of coffee. Thomas entered, catching her off guard. "Abigail," he said, gesturing to the chair across from her, "mind if I join you?" "Be my guest," she replied, setting her mug down. Thomas hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to thank you for the work you've done on the app. It's remarkable." Abigail tilted her head, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Remarkable, huh? Coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment," he chuckled softly. "It is, and I mean it." For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the buzz of the office fading into the background. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas ventured. "Shoot," Abigail said. "Why did you decide to help with the algorithm that night? You didn't have to." Abigail shrugged, her tone light. "Sometimes the best way to change your circumstances is to prove you're more than what people expect. Plus, I like a good challenge." Thomas nodded, her words resonating with him. "Well, you've certainly exceeded expectations." Abigail raised her mug in mock toast. "Here's to setting the bar higher." That weekend, Abigail sat in her apartment, scrolling through Elite Encounters again. Her chat with an imperfect gentleman had continued to unfold, each message revealing a little more about him. Though they hadn't exchanged personal details, she found herself drawn to his candidness and humor. As she typed her latest reply, her phone buzzed with a notification from the app. It was a message from him. "How about we meet in person?" Abigail's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, staring at the screen. Finally, she typed back, "Name the time and place." The bustling energy of a popular downtown cafe set the stage for their first meeting. Abigail sat at a corner table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her coffee cup. She had arrived early, wanting to compose herself before facing an imperfect gentleman in person. Her confidence, usually steadfast, wavered as her mind played through scenarios. What if he's disappointed? What if this is a mistake? The bell above the door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. A tall figure stepped inside, scanning the room. When their eyes met, Abigail's heart stopped. It was Thomas. His expression mirrored her shock. "You," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and intrigue. Abigail blinked, gripping her cup tighter. "You're an imperfect gentleman? And you're a big personality," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For a moment, neither moved. Then Thomas gestured to the chair opposite her. "May I?" Abigail nodded, still processing the coincidence. Or was it fate? As he sat down, she broke the silence. "This is unexpected." "To say the least," Thomas agreed, his tone warm but measured. "I didn't connect the dots, but now that I'm here, I can't say I'm unhappy about it." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "You don't think it's strange? Matching with someone you already know?" "Strange, maybe," he admitted, "but also kind of serendipitous." She studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity, but found none. "So what now?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Now, we have that conversation we've been having online, only this time face to face. Meanwhile, Gabrielle sat in her designer living room, scrolling through social media with a glass of wine in hand. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. The cracks in her relationship with Thomas had grown more apparent since Abigail's arrival. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A friend had sent her a message. "Isn't this your fiancé?" Thought you'd want to know attached was a photo of Thomas and Abigail at the cafe, their body language exuding familiarity and ease. Gabrielle's grip tightened on the phone. Her jaw clenched as a simmering anger began to build. "This ends now," she muttered, determination hardening her features. Back at the cafe, the conversation between Thomas and Abigail flowed effortlessly. They laughed, shared stories, and found themselves discovering nuances about each other they hadn't expected. "You know," Abigail said, stirring her latte, "when I first saw your profile, I thought, this guy must be full of himself." Thomas chuckled. "And now?" "Now I think you're maybe 20% full of yourself," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "Progress," he said with a grin. As the conversation deepened, Thomas found himself drawn to Abigail's honesty and wit. She, in turn, was surprised by his humility, a stark contrast to the polished exterior he often presented. Their connection, though unexpected, felt natural, almost inevitable. The next day, Gabrielle stormed into Thomas's office unannounced, her anger barely contained. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said, slamming the photo from the cafe onto his desk. Thomas looked at the picture, then back at Gabrielle, his expression calm. "What is this supposed to prove?" "That you're making a fool of me," she snapped. "You're out in public with her, like it's some kind of date." "First of all, calm down," Thomas said, his voice firm. "Second, it wasn't a date. And third, you have no right to question who I speak to, especially after your behavior with Abigail." Gabrielle's eyes narrowed. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see that?" Thomas stood, his patience thinning. "The only manipulation I've seen is yours. Abigail has done nothing but prove her worth, while you've gone out of your way to undermine her." Gabrielle's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. That evening, Thomas sat in his penthouse, replaying the events of the day. His thoughts inevitably returned to Abigail. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, unapologetically herself, unbothered by superficial expectations. He opened Elite Encounters and saw a new message from her. "Thanks for today. It was refreshing." He smiled and typed back, "The pleasure was all mine. Let's do it again soon." Her response came quickly. "Careful, Manning. I might start expecting free coffee from you." "Deal," he replied, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Days later, Abigail, now firmly entrenched in her role within the IT department, continued to excel. Her colleagues respected her ingenuity and problem-solving skills, and even Clark, her once intimidating supervisor, spoke highly of her contributions. But as she thrived professionally, her dynamic with Thomas grew increasingly complex. Their interactions, though professional on the surface, carried an undercurrent of unspoken emotions. It wasn't long before Gabrielle's resentment boiled over. Determined to reclaim control, she approached the board of directors with a formal complaint against Abigail, citing baseless claims of misconduct. The move backfired. The board, already wary of Gabrielle's erratic behavior, dismissed her claims after a brief investigation, cleared Abigail of any wrongdoing. The fallout was swift. Gabrielle's reputation within the company took a hit, and her engagement to Thomas began to crumble under the weight of mistrust and irreconcilable differences. 1 month later, Thomas and Abigail found themselves working late on a new project for Elite Encounters. The office was quiet, save for the occasional hum of electronics. "You've been quiet," Abigail said, breaking the silence. "Just thinking," Thomas replied, glancing at her, "about how much has changed in the past few months." "For better or worse?" she asked, her tone playful but curious. "For better," he said, his voice sincere. Abigail met his gaze, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Careful, Manning. You're starting to sound sentimental." "Maybe I am," he admitted. The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet was charged with unspoken possibilities. The steady rhythm of Abigail's keyboard clicks filled the quiet office. It was another late night at Manning Tower, and the building's usual bustling energy had been replaced with an almost eerie calm. Thomas stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights, his thoughts swirling. "Another late night?" Abigail asked, without looking up, her voice tinged with humor. "Seems to be the norm lately," Thomas replied, turning to face her. "You know, you've become something of a fixture around here. The department can't seem to stop singing your praises." Abigail smirked, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. "I'd say I'm just doing my job, but we both know I've gone above and beyond. Modesty isn't my strong suit." Thomas laughed softly. "I've noticed. But seriously, Abigail, you've made an impact on the company, on the app, and on me." Her smile faltered slightly, and she looked up, meeting his gaze. "What are you trying to say, Thomas?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "I'm saying that I admire you, your resilience, your honesty. It's rare." Abigail's expression softened, but she quickly masked it with her usual wit. "Careful, Manning. Flattery might make me demand a raise." Thomas chuckled, though his eyes lingered on hers a moment too long. The silence between them grew, laden with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Abigail broke the moment by turning back to her screen. "Well, if you're done buttering me up, I still have bugs to fix," she said lightly. Thomas nodded, his thoughts still lingering as he returned to his desk. Meanwhile, across the city, Gabrielle paced the marble floor of her penthouse, her frustration mounting. She had always prided herself on control over her career, her relationships, her image. But since Abigail's arrival, everything had begun to unravel. Her attempts to discredit Abigail had not only failed, but backfired spectacularly. The board's dismissal of her complaints had embarrassed her, and Thomas's growing distance only deepened her sense of betrayal. She stared at her phone, scrolling through her contacts, until she landed on a name: Victoria Lawson, a public relations specialist with a reputation for handling delicate matters. Gabrielle dialed the number. "Victoria, it's Gabrielle Simmons," she said when the call connected. "I need your help with a situation." Victoria's voice was smooth, professional. "Of course. What kind of situation are we talking about?" Gabrielle glanced out the window, her jaw tightening. "Reputation management. Let's just say there's someone I need to remove from the equation." The following week, Thomas sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by his senior team. The atmosphere was tense. The launch of Elite Encounters was just days away, and last-minute preparations were in full swing. "We've resolved the server issues, and the user interface updates are complete," Abigail reported, her voice steady and confident. Clark chimed in. "User feedback from the beta tests has been overwhelmingly positive. The matchmaking algorithm is performing better than expected." Thomas nodded, his expression focused. "Good. Let's keep this momentum going. I want everything flawless by launch day." As the meeting adjourned, Thomas caught Abigail's arm as she stood to leave. "Abigail, can I speak with you for a moment?" She arched an eyebrow but nodded, sitting back down as the others filed out. Thomas leaned forward, his tone quieter now. "I need to ask you something personal." "Personal?" Abigail repeated, her curiosity piqued. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Anyone treating you differently, or perhaps trying to undermine you?" Abigail frowned, taken aback. "Not directly. Why?" Thomas hesitated before answering. "Gabrielle isn't happy about how things have unfolded. She's been unpredictable lately. I just want to make sure she isn't causing problems for you." Abigail's lips curled into a wry smile. "Thomas, I've dealt with people like Gabrielle before. She doesn't scare me." Thomas smiled faintly, though concern lingered in his eyes. "Still, let me know if anything comes up. I've got your back." Abigail's expression softened, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the weight of his words. "Thanks, Thomas. I'll keep that in mind." That evening, Abigail sat on her couch, scrolling through her Elite Encounters messages. Her conversations with an imperfect gentleman had grown increasingly frequent and candid, though she still hadn't connected the dots about his true identity. Tonight, his message caught her off guard. "What's the one thing you've always wanted, but never had the courage to pursue?" She stared at the screen, pondering her response. Finally, she typed, "A life where I don't have to prove my worth to anyone. Where I'm seen for who I really am." The reply came quickly. "You deserve that, and I hope you find it." Abigail smiled, her heart unexpectedly warmed by the simple sentiment. The night before the launch, Gabrielle's plan was in motion. Victoria Lawson had provided her with a strategy to leak damaging, but fabricated, information about Abigail to the press, aimed at discrediting her just as the app launched. Gabrielle was confident the fallout would force Thomas to cut ties with Abigail permanently. But as she prepared to finalize the details, an email landed in her inbox. It was from Thomas. "Gabrielle, we need to talk. Meet me in my office first thing tomorrow." Her stomach twisted. Had he found out about her plan? Launch day? The atmosphere at Manning Tower was electric. The official unveiling of Elite Encounters had attracted investors, journalists, and influencers alike. Cameras flashed and excitement buzzed through the air. Abigail stood near the stage, watching as Thomas took the microphone to deliver his opening remarks. "Elite Encounters isn't just an app," Thomas began, his voice confident. "It's a platform designed to connect people in ways that go beyond algorithms, because at its core, connection is about authenticity." The crowd erupted into applause. Thomas glanced at Abigail, their eyes meeting briefly. Her chest swelled with pride, both for him and for her own role in the project's success. As the event continued, Gabrielle lingered on the sidelines, her expression unreadable. She had chosen not to act on Victoria's plan, unsure whether it was hesitation or fear of repercussions that had stopped her. For now, she would wait and watch. That evening, the celebration wound down, leaving only a handful of staff to clean up. Abigail lingered, packing up her things when Thomas approached. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Abigail corrected. A genuine smile lighting up her face. Thomas hesitated, then added, "Let me take you to dinner." As a thank you, Abigail arched an eyebrow. "Dinner, huh? Sounds suspiciously like a date." "Call it whatever you want," he said, his tone playful. "But you deserve it." Abigail pretended to consider. "Fine, but only if there's dessert." Thomas laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "Deal." The warmth in his words lingered with Abigail long after the chat ended. Their conversation had been filled with laughter and a surprising sense of ease, flowing naturally as if they had known each other for years. For hours, Abigail maintained her playful charm, feeling something special about their interaction. When the clock struck late, she decided to end the chat on a light note. "This was a great conversation, imperfect man, but it's time for me to call it a night." His reply came quickly, laced with humor and genuine interest. "Until next time, big girl." With a smile lingering on her lips, Abigail logged out of the chat, turned off the computer, and gathered her things. Leaving the IT room behind, she stepped into the cool night air and headed toward the company parking lot, where her bicycle awaited. Unexpected love is like a breeze on a sweltering day. It arrives unannounced, bringing a refreshing reprieve to the heart and reminding us that genuine connections don't require elaborate introductions, just authenticity. As Abigail reached the building's exit and bid the security guard good night, a deep, teasing voice called out from behind her. "Working late again, Miss Ex-Cleaner?" Abigail turned to see Thomas standing casually, hands in his pockets, his face illuminated by a playful smile. She raised an eyebrow, surprised but amused. "And what are you doing here so late, Thomas?" I thought hard work was for us underlings. Her comment elicited a genuine laugh from Thomas, a sound so infectious that it made Abigail chuckle in return. For a moment the night seemed to brighten as their shared laughter echoed. After a pause, Thomas studied her with curiosity. "So, how was your first official day in the IT department?" Abigail smirked. "Well, I'm not one to toot my own horn, so I'll let your head of IT give you the report tomorrow, but let's just say I crushed it." He laughed again, clearly enjoying her confidence. "How do you know so much about programming anyway? You promised to tell me in exchange for dinner, remember?" She arched an eyebrow, her tone playful, but firm. "I never said it was a date." Thomas shot back without missing a beat. "Yes, you did. Dinner counts as a date if it involves food and two people." "Oh, good," Abigail replied with mock relief. "For a moment I thought I'd have to face your fiancé in court over this alleged date." Their shared laughter returned, filling the quiet parking lot. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, Thomas declared, "Come on, let's go grab some dinner." Abigail hesitated, glancing at her bicycle. "And what about my trusty bike?" "Don't worry," he replied, already walking toward his car. "We'll put it in the trunk." A short while later, the two of them sat in a cozy restaurant with live music playing softly in the background. The dim lighting and warm atmosphere felt almost magical, and Abigail found herself relaxing more than she had in months. As they waited for their meals, a lively tune filled the air. Abigail's face lit up as she recognized the melody. "I love this song," she said softly, her eyes sparkling. Noticing her sudden shift in mood, Thomas asked, "What is it? What's caught your attention?" She looked around the room, then back at him with a mischievous smile. "Just looking for someone, a dance partner maybe." Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Well, you don't have to look far. There's a willing candidate sitting right here." Abigail laughed, pretending to scrutinize him. Not bad. All right, you're hired." They both stood and made their way to the small dance floor, earning curious glances from other diners. The band played energetically, and Abigail moved with a natural joy, her steps vibrant and unrestrained. Thomas, elegant yet relaxed, kept up with her effortlessly. By the end of the song, a round of applause erupted from the audience. Abigail and Thomas exchanged slightly embarrassed but delighted smiles before returning to their table. When two souls move in harmony, dance becomes a meditation in motion, a fleeting moment where egos dissolve, leaving only shared energy and pure connection. The music transitioned to a slower tune, its melody soft and inviting. Thomas leaned closer, his expression more serious now. "Would you grant me this dance as well, Miss Ex-Cleaner?" he asked, with a touch of formality and a playful smile. Abigail chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "As long as your arms are long enough to go round me, of course." They stepped onto the dance floor once more, but this time their movements were slower, more deliberate. Abigail allowed herself to relax fully, resting her hands in his as they swayed to the music. The room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the rhythm of the melody and the steady beating of their hearts. After a moment, Thomas broke the silence with a question. "Abigail, will you finally tell me how you know so much about programming?" She sighed softly, her smile faint but genuine. "It's a bit of a long story," she began. "I never went to college or got a degree, but technology has always fascinated me. My stepfather, who's no longer with us, was a self-taught tech genius. We didn't have much, but he believed knowledge was the best inheritance he could give me." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "He spent countless hours teaching me how to fix computers, write code, and solve problems. I guess I picked it up naturally over the years, even though I never had the chance to study formally." Thomas listened intently, admiration shining in his eyes. "You're living proof that passion and dedication can achieve what no degree ever could. True talent doesn't come from a classroom. It comes from the heart of someone who genuinely loves what they do." Abigail smiled, her gratitude evident. They danced in silence, the connection between them deepening with each passing moment. Later, they returned to their table just as the waiter arrived with their meals. The evening unfolded beautifully, filled with laughter, stories, and an undeniable spark. But neither of them realized that the coming day would bring challenges neither could anticipate. The winds of fate often carry hidden intentions. While we dance to life's tune, the shadows we ignore may lie in wait to disrupt our rhythm. The next morning, the air at the consortium was charged with anticipation. In the IT department, Clark Octavio approached Abigail with a light smile, clearly confident in the team's progress. "Good morning, Abigail. How's the matchmaking system? Were you able to resolve yesterday's synchronization issue?" he asked with optimism. "Yes, sir," Abigail replied proudly. "I tested everything last night and the system was stable. No issues." Clark nodded approvingly and took a seat to verify the system himself. As he navigated the interface, everything appeared to be in perfect working order. Reports were running smoothly, and the compatibility algorithms responded flawlessly. But just as he began to relax, an alert flashed across the main screen. Moments later, an urgent email from the support team arrived reporting massive failures in the matchmaking platform. Users were being paired with incorrect or duplicated profiles, and some accounts were inexplicably linked to strangers. Clark's expression darkened as he turned to Abigail. "What's going on? The system is collapsing." Abigail stood frozen, her mind racing. "That's impossible. Everything was fine when I left last night." Clark's tone sharpened. "Well, something's clearly gone wrong. We need answers, fast." The tension in the IT department was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Clark's usually composed demeanor showed cracks as he stared at the chaotic error logs cascading across the monitors. Abigail, standing beside him, felt the weight of his unspoken accusation pressing down on her. "This is serious," Clark said finally, his voice low but edged with urgency. "The system's core functionality is compromised. Abigail, I need you to walk me through every single change you made last night." Abigail inhaled deeply, her mind racing to process the situation. "Sir, I already explained. I ran thorough tests before leaving. The platform was functioning perfectly when I signed off." Clark nodded but remained tense. "Even so, we can't afford to overlook anything. Start from the top." Abigail stepped to her workstation and pulled up the logs from the previous night. She meticulously outlined every adjustment she had implemented, the reasoning behind each one, and the successful test results. As she spoke, her confidence began to falter, not because she doubted her work, but because she couldn't explain what had gone so catastrophically wrong. Just then, one of the junior IT staff approached, his face pale. "Sir, we've just checked the user activity logs. It looks like multiple accounts were accessed from an unauthorized IP address early this morning." Clark's brows furrowed. "Unauthorized? How? And why didn't the security protocols flag this?" "I don't know," the junior staffer admitted, "but the timing lines up with when the errors started." Abigail seized on the information. If there was unauthorized access, that could explain the errors. Someone might have tampered with the system after I left. Clark turned to her, skepticism clouding his expression. "Do you have any way to prove that?" "Yes," Abigail replied without hesitation. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. "This is the backup I saved last night. It contains the exact state of the system before I left. If we compare it to the current version, we'll know what changed." Clark studied the USB for a moment, then gave a brisk nod. "Plug it in. Let's find out." As Abigail began the restoration process, a new presence entered the room. Thomas strode in, flanked by Gabrielle, whose expression was a mix of feigned concern and thinly veiled satisfaction. "What's going on here?" Thomas asked, his tone sharp as he addressed Clark. "Why am I hearing about a system failure just hours before our platform's official launch?" Clark straightened, though the stress was evident in his posture. "We're investigating the issue, sir. It appears that changes were made to the system this morning from an unauthorized source." Thomas's gaze shifted to Abigail. "And you?" he asked, his voice measured. "What's your explanation for this?" Abigail met his eyes with unwavering resolve. "I did my job, Mr. Manning. I implemented the updates as instructed, and the system was stable when I left. The backup I saved last night will prove that the errors weren't caused by my work." Before Thomas could respond, Gabrielle interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. "Really? And we're supposed to take her word for it? This is what happens when you give someone with no formal training responsibilities they can't handle." Abigail turned to face Gabrielle, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the other woman's condescension. "The truth will come out. Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant." Gabrielle scoffed, but before she could fire back, Clark interrupted. "Let's stay focused. Abigail, how's the restoration process coming along?" Abigail nodded toward the monitor. "Almost done. Once it's complete, we'll be able to compare the two versions side by side." The room fell into a tense silence as the system ran its comparison. Finally, a report appeared on the screen, highlighting several files that had been modified after Abigail's logged changes. Each unauthorized adjustment was time-stamped and traced to the same IP address. Clark leaned closer, his expression darkening. "This IP, it's registered to an office in this building." Thomas moved to the screen, scanning the details. His jaw tightened as realization dawned. "That's Gabrielle's office." All eyes turned to Gabrielle, whose confident facade began to crumble. "That's ridiculous," she exclaimed, her voice shrill. "Anyone could have used my computer. This is obviously a setup." Thomas stepped closer to her, his voice low but firm. "Gabrielle, if you have an explanation, now's the time," she stammered, searching for words. I don't know how this happened. Maybe someone hacked into my system, or maybe—" She turned to Abigail, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe she planted those changes to frame me." Abigail didn't flinch. "Every action in the system is logged and time-stamped. If I had tampered with your computer, it would show up in the access logs. Let's check them." Thomas nodded to Clark. "Do it." Within moments, the access logs confirmed that the unauthorized changes had been made from Gabrielle's computer and from her personal login credentials. The room was silent as Thomas turned back to Gabrielle. "Why?" he asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Why would you do this?" Gabrielle's composure shattered. "Because you've been distracted ever since she showed up," she shouted, pointing at Abigail. "She doesn't belong here, Thomas. She's not one of us. And yet you've been spending all your time with her, trusting her, valuing her, over me. I had to do something to protect what's mine." Thomas's expression hardened. "What's yours? Gabrielle, this isn't about you. This is about the company, the platform, and the people who depend on us to get it right. You jeopardized all of that out of jealousy." Gabrielle's defiance flickered, replaced by desperation. "Thomas, I was only trying to—" "Enough," he cut her off, his voice cold. He turned to Clark. "Have security escort her out. She's no longer welcome here." Gabrielle's protests echoed through the room as two guards arrived to take her away. Thomas didn't watch her go. His attention was on Abigail, who stood quietly, her expression unreadable. "Abigail," he said after a moment, "I owe you an apology. I doubted you when I shouldn't have." She gave a small smile, though her voice was tinged with emotion. "I just wanted to do my job, Thomas. That's all." He nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "And you did it better than anyone could have." That evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse was subdued as Thomas sat on the balcony staring out at the city skyline. His thoughts were a tangle of regret, relief, and something else he couldn't quite name. A soft chime pulled him from his reverie. Checking his phone, he saw a message on Elite Encounters. "Hey, imperfect man, rough day?" He smiled faintly, typing back, "You could say that, but it ended better than it started." "Care to share?" she replied. Thomas hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Let's just say I realize today who I can really trust." Her reply came quickly. "Sounds like you're learning." "I am, slowly but surely." He set the phone down, a feeling of quiet contentment settling over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The following day, the consortium buzzed with a mix of relief and cautious optimism. Gabrielle's abrupt departure had sent ripples through the company, but the focus quickly shifted back to the imminent launch of Elite Encounters. Thomas had called for an all-hands meeting to rally the team and address lingering concerns. Abigail entered the conference room, her confidence tempered by a touch of uncertainty. The events of the previous day had left her emotionally drained, but she was determined to move forward. As she took her seat, she noticed Thomas at the head of the table, his demeanor calm but resolute. "First," Thomas began, his gaze sweeping across the room, "I want to thank each of you for your hard work and dedication. Yesterday's setback could have derailed us, but instead it reminded me of something important. Resilience is our greatest strength." The team nodded, their collective energy buoyed by his words. Thomas continued, his eyes briefly meeting Abigail's. "And to those who went above and beyond to protect this platform, your efforts didn't go unnoticed. Today, we move forward stronger than ever." A round of applause erupted, and Abigail felt a swell of pride. She couldn't ignore the warmth in Thomas's expression as he looked at her. It was fleeting, but it carried a weight she couldn't quite put into words. Later that evening, Abigail sat at her desk in the IT department, tidying up the final bits of code ahead of the platform's official launch. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of computers and the occasional rustle of papers. Just as she leaned back in her chair to stretch, the door opened, and Thomas stepped inside. "You're still here," he said, his tone light but curious. "I could say the same for you," Abigail replied with a small smile. "Shouldn't the boss be celebrating his big win?" Thomas chuckled, stepping closer. "I'll celebrate when the platform is live and flawless. Until then, I'm just another guy trying to get it right." Abigail tilted her head, studying him. "You're too modest for someone who owns half of downtown. And you're too humble for someone who just saved my company," he countered, his smile softening. "You know, I've been thinking." "Uh-oh," Abigail teased. "That sounds dangerous." Thomas laughed, but his expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about how much you've done for this company, and for me, and I've realized that I owe you more than an apology." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" Thomas hesitated, then spoke with sincerity. "I want you to take on a larger role here, not just in IT, but across the company. Your perspective, your creativity, they're exactly what this place needs." Abigail blinked, caught off guard. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he urged, his tone gentle but firm. "This isn't charity, Abigail. You've earned this." She considered his words, her mind swirling with emotions. Finally, she smiled. "All right, I'm in." The night of the launch, the atmosphere in the Grand Hall was electric. Investors, media, and potential users had gathered to witness the unveiling of Elite Encounters, and the energy in the room was palpable. Abigail stood to the side, watching as Thomas took the stage to deliver his keynote address. "This platform is more than just an app," Thomas began, his voice resonating with confidence. "It's a testament to the belief that connection transcends barriers. Elite Encounters isn't just about finding matches, it's about discovering the unexpected and embracing authenticity." The crowd erupted in applause, and Thomas's eyes found Abigail in the sea of faces. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if he was speaking directly to her. As the evening progressed, Abigail mingled with guests, answering questions about the platform's functionality and sharing her insights. She couldn't help but notice how many people were impressed by her knowledge and enthusiasm. It was a far cry from her first days at the consortium, and the realization filled her with quiet pride. Toward the end of the night, Thomas approached her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," he said, offering one to her. Abigail accepted the glass with a smile. Two unexpected connections. They clinked glasses, and for a moment the noise of the crowd faded into the background. It was just the two of them, standing on the precipice of something neither could fully articulate. The following week, with the launch behind them, life at the consortium began to settle into a new rhythm. Abigail's expanded role brought new challenges and opportunities, and she threw herself into the work with characteristic determination. But amidst the bustle of her professional life, her personal connection with Thomas deepened. Their late-night conversations became more frequent, their shared laughter more effortless. Yet unspoken questions lingered between them, and neither seemed ready to confront the growing bond they shared. One evening, as they walked together to the parking lot after a long day, Thomas broke the silence. "Abigail, can I ask you something?" he said, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course," she replied, glancing at him. "Do you ever think about what brought you here, to this company, to this moment?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She smiled softly. "All the time. Life has a funny way of steering us where we're meant to be, even if it takes a few detours." Thomas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "And do you ever wonder what's next?" Abigail hesitated, then said with quiet honesty, "I try not to overthink it. The best things in my life have always been the ones I didn't see coming." Thomas's expression softened, and for a moment the world seemed to pause around them. "I think the best things are still ahead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail's breath caught, but before she could respond, a distant car horn shattered the moment, pulling them back to reality. "Let me walk you to your car," Thomas offered, his tone lightening. Abigail nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Lead the way, imperfect man." Months passed, and the success of Elite Encounters cemented the consortium's place as a leader in tech innovation. Abigail, now a trusted executive, continued to excel in her role. Her bond with Thomas deepened, both professionally and personally, though they carefully navigated the complexities of their evolving relationship. One evening, after a particularly long day, Thomas invited Abigail to dinner, not at a restaurant, but to his penthouse, where he had prepared a simple but heartfelt meal. As they sat together, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, Thomas finally addressed the question that had lingered unspoken between them. "Abigail," he began, his voice steady but vulnerable, "I've spent my life building things, businesses, systems, even walls around myself. But you've shown me that the best connections aren't built, they happen naturally. You've changed my life in ways I never expected." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "And you've shown me that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest rewards." Thomas took a deep breath, reaching for her hand. "I don't want to imagine my life without you. Will you give us a chance to build something real?" Abigail's heart swelled. "I'd like nothing more, imperfect man." Years later, Thomas and Abigail stood in the garden of their family home, surrounded by their children. The laughter of their 6 little ones filled the air, a symphony of joy that echoed the love they had built together. Thomas looked at Abigail, her smile radiant, as she cradled their youngest. "We may not have planned any of this," he said, "but it's better than anything I could have imagined." Abigail leaned into him, her voice warm. "Sometimes life's imperfections are the perfect plan." As they embraced, the wind carried the sound of their children's laughter, a reminder that true connection and happiness come not from perfection, but from the courage to embrace the unexpected.